Healthy soils are essential for achieving broader goals, such as net zero carbon emission, reversing biodiversity loss, and sustaining human health. But to fix our soils, we must first understand them. We need tools to identify quickly the land that is being degraded and needs our attention. Then policymakers can target those areas with policies to promote sustainable land management and farming practices. For this series, we are interviewing some of the leading scientists who are working to create these tools. They are part of the project funded by the European Union called AI for Soil Health. And as the name suggests, they are using artificial intelligence and a range of other cutting-edge innovation to lead the way towards understanding our soils. In this episode, we hear from Mogens Humlekrog Greve, professor at Aarhus University. I'm Mogens, and thank you for joining us today. Let's start with why are projects like AI for Soil Health so important in today's political and environmental context?
There has been a sort of an increasing focus on soil health across Europe, especially in the European Union, because of the very poor state of the soil health across Europe. More than 90% of the agricultural soil is degraded some way or another, so it's really very important. And a lot of the projects is a preparation to do political actions to achieve the goal of healthy soils in 2050.
And what is a soil care index and why is it important for countries trying to understand their soil?
Soil care is a way to mitigate bad health of the soil. The reason why I started talking about soil care is that we have a soil monitoring law. It's non-binding law, but there is an obligation for the member states to train and inform farmers of what they can actually do to improve the soil health on the farms. That's one thing. The other thing is that it's a monitoring system. So the first round of monitoring is done in 2031, where we'll get the first status of the soil health. And just after the second round in 2037, we will have a very concrete idea on what direction is the soil health moving. And there we would expect a strong political action if it's going in the wrong direction. But that is actually too late. The soil monitoring law had a lot of emphasis on measuring soil parameters, these soil health indicators. But we need to focus on the action of the farmers because it's the farmers who need to change their behavior to change the soil health and the direction in which this is developing. And we can start with soil care already now. So we can already now advise the farmers to start. And for example, with soil carbon, we have a very long response rate. When you start changing things, it'll be 10, 15, 20 years before we can actually really measure a change in the soil. And with soil carbon, we are even more challenged because we have the global warming. And if we don't do anything, we will actually lose carbon. So if we don't do activity now, we will actually lose carbon during the first and second monitoring period. So that's why it's really important that we start now and we start with the soil care activities. We have to change the way we grow the farms. We have to do regenerative farming. We have to change our management practices. So that's why I think it's important for us to focus on this already now.
And why is measuring management practices potentially better than measuring outcomes?
I already mentioned it to you now. The practices can actually start now, so we can start doing change now. That's one thing. The second thing is very easy for us to measure change in soil management practice. And we have a political instrument, the CAP system, the Common Agricultural Policy, which is actually constructed to measure and change management on farm level. So we have the political instrument to do it, and we can do it right now to achieve the soil health in 2050. So that's why actually I think it's really important for us to focus on this now.
And if you were advising a government minister to create a soil monitoring framework, what would you say to him or to her?
That's a difficult question because member states now are actually struggling hard to figure out how should this actually be designed. So there's a lot of scientific work going on at the moment. Actually, not really do any recommendation now, but this is an ongoing discussion. So I think in 1 year we will be much smarter regarding how it should actually be performed. But I would actually recommend that you start looking at how we can actually start to implement this system of changing soil management. So, because in the soil monitoring law, there's no obligation to actually register activity. It's only measurement. And I think if we only do measurements, we cannot use that measurement for anything if we don't have the activity registered at the same time. So these two have to go in parallel. And if I have a recommendation now, that is that they expand the monitoring with adding activity data from the farms. So we can couple farmers' management practices to the measurements of the indicators. So that is a very important part. If I should have additional recommendation, it would actually be that we register what I call contextual information. Now it's very simple measurements, mostly in the topsoil. And if we don't put this into a context of a soil profile, the water holding capacity, the pedology, the climate and everything, it's difficult to use it and understand what's actually going on. So my recommendation would also be to establish in the first round of monitoring the contextual information, meaning dig soil profile, measure retention curve, etc.
You mentioned the soil monitoring law that have been approved by the European Union, but how are projects like AI for Soil Health involved in that?
We were actually involved in the process up till it was actually approved. And I think there was a lot of scientists from other projects also, for example, Benchmark. They were also involved in do recommendations for their local politicians, but also for their MEPs, the national MEPs from each country. But we also participated in some technical reports trying to figure out how it should actually be done. So there was a heavily involvement from a lot of the Mission Soil project in the process towards approval of the soil monitoring law.
And what do you see in the future of soil health science?
I think we're actually just beginning now. The soil monitoring law has raised some important questions and mentioned some indicators. But for example, all the issues with critical values of all the indicators, that's a completely unsolved questions. And this has to be developed in the scientific community from now on. Then we have, for example, all the biological and microbiological indicators. We don't understand the microbiology in soils yet. So there's a huge task in front of us to understand the interaction between soil management, soil properties, and soil microbiology. And that is something we need to dive into in the future, I think. There is enormous need for science in relation to the restoration of the soil health in Europe and also globally, I think.
So what excites you the most about soil science right now?
What excites me the most is actually that we got the soil monitoring law approved. So there is a political agenda now that we need new soil health. What has been protected for decades, the atmosphere has been protected for decades. But the soil is the last of the common good, which has not been protected by EU legislation. And in many countries, actually, there has not even been a local legislation protecting the soils. For example, in Denmark, we have almost non-protection of the soil health side. So I think that focus is really very important, and it's very exciting for us to look into it.
Finally, is there a question that I didn't ask but you would like to answer? Any topic we didn't cover?
I think one of the things which is really important and which is quite unsolved is how we're actually going to implement this in collaboration with the farmers. And I think this is a big question. In many countries in Europe, we have a big conflict between governments and farmers. And we cannot solve the issue of soil health in an environment of conflict because it's actually the soil managers who need to solve this problem. So we need to get into a situation where there's a collaborative spirit between all actors in the environmental agricultural society. So I think that is actually something we should focus on forward.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
AI for Soil Health is funded by the European Union and has received funds from UK Research and Innovation under the UK government's Horizon Europe funding guarantee. For more information, visit aiforsoilhealth.eu. That is AI for as number soilhealth.eu.